The note was still in my hand when I started the car. 4 words, written fast ink, slightly smeared on the left edge like she'd folded it before it dried. Don't sign anything. No name, no explanation. Just a stranger's handwriting pressed into my palm while my mother-in-law's back was turned. I sat in the parking garage on level 2 of a Buckhead bank on a Tuesday morning engine, running hands not quite steady. Virginia was still inside, probably at the counter right now, confused, maybe annoyed, telling someone her daughter-in-law had taken ill. That part was true enough. Something had gone wrong in my body the moment I read those 4 words, not dizziness, exactly more, like a sudden awareness of gravity. I had almost signed. The pen was already in my hand. Before we go any further, what time is it where you are right now? Drop your time and your country in the comments. I want to know who's here with me for this one. The thing about a life that looks right from the outside is that you stop questioning it from the inside. Derek and I met at a fundraiser for the West Side Atlanta Arts Collective 11 years ago. I was 23, working as a junior acquisitions associate at a mid-size real estate firm, wearing a dress I'd bought on sale and pretending I belonged in that room. He was 31, already running his own property development company, moving through the crowd like he'd been born knowing how to work it. He found me near the silent auction table studying a piece by a painter I actually knew, and he said not as a line, just as a statement. Most people in here are pretending to care about that painting. You actually do. I married him 3 years later. The wedding was Virginia's production from start to finish. I told myself that was fine. She had opinions about centerpieces and seating charts and the exact shade of ivory for the napkins, and Derek said it was easier to let her have the small things. I believed him because I wanted to. Because the alternative that there were no small things with Virginia-only territory was a thought I wasn't ready to sit with. Virginia Elaine Calloway had built her identity around 2 things, the Calloway name and the Calloway money. Not old money by Atlanta standards, but old enough. Derek's father, Raymond, had died when Derek was 26, leaving behind a portfolio of commercial properties in southwest Atlanta and a reputation in the black business community that Virginia had spent the subsequent decade carefully maintaining and quietly expanding in her own name. She chaired 2 nonprofit boards. She attended the right church. She sent handwritten notes after funerals, always on cream stationery, always arriving within 48 hours. She was also the kind of woman who remembered every favor she'd ever done for you and forgot everyone you'd done for her. I noticed it early. I filed it away. That is, I think now, the first mistake I made in that marriage, treating red flags like footnotes instead of headlines. We lived in a house in Cascade Heights that we'd bought in year 2 of our marriage, mostly with the $340,000 I'd inherited when my grandmother passed. Derek contributed the down payment gap and handled the mortgage paperwork. I remember thinking it made sense he was the one who understood real estate financing, who knew the lawyers, who had the relationships with the title company. I was good at my job, but I deferred to him on the mechanics of our shared financial life, the way you defer to a doctor about your own body. You trust the expertise. You sign where you're told to sign. We had a joint account at First Meridian Private Bank, the branch in Buckhead. Derek had banked there since his father's time. It was the kind of bank where they knew your name at the door and offered you water with lemon while you waited. I had been there maybe 4 times in 6 years. Derek handled the accounts. Again, his world, his relationships, his fluency. I let him navigate. Looking back, I can see exactly how that arrangement was constructed. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a room gets dark when the sun moves, you don't notice until you reach for a light switch and realize you've been sitting in the dark for an hour. There were other things. Small things, except they weren't. Derek had a habit of CCing Virginia on emails that concerned our finances. He called it keeping her in the loop. She'd helped him restructure one of his property deals early in our marriage, and he said she had good instincts. I accepted that. What I didn't fully clock was that Virginia was being CC'd on emails that had nothing to do with Derek's business and everything to do with ours: joint tax documents, insurance renewals, correspondence from our estate attorney about updating our wills. Once, about 3 years in, I asked Derek why his mother needed to know the details of our life insurance policy. He laughed, not meanly, just easily, the way people laugh when they think you're being slightly irrational. "She's not going to do anything with it, Lucy. She just likes to feel included. You know how she is." I did know how she was. That was the problem, but I loved him. And love, I have since learned, has a particular talent for making reasonable people accept unreasonable things, one small concession at a time. You give an inch here, an inch there, and one day you look down and realize you're standing in a place you never intended to be, with no clear memory of how the walk felt. The morning Virginia suggested we go to the bank together, it was a Thursday in March. Derek was at a site visit in Decatur, or so he said. Virginia called me at 9:14 a.m. Her voice was the voice she used when something was already decided, and she was merely notifying me of the outcome. "I need to pop into First Meridian this morning to take care of some account maintenance. Since you're on the joint account, it makes sense for you to come along. Shouldn't take more than an hour. Account maintenance." That was the phrase she used. I said yes, because I always said yes. Because 6 years of small concessions had made yes feel like the path of least resistance, and no feel like the start of a conversation I didn't have the energy for. I put on my coat, I got in the car. I followed Virginia Calloway into a bank on a Tuesday morning without a single question. I almost didn't make it back out as myself. The vest was the first thing I should have noticed. Virginia had a navy blue Armani pantsuit she reserved for what she called consequential mornings. I'd seen her wear it exactly 3 times before that day, the morning she renegotiated the lease on one of Raymond's commercial properties. After a tenant tried to walk the day, she appeared before the zoning board to fight a development restriction on a lot she owned in East Atlanta. And the afternoon she sat across from Derek's first business partner and methodically dismantled a verbal agreement the man thought was binding. She was wearing it when she picked me up at 9:47 a.m., I noticed. I remember thinking, and then immediately setting the thought aside, she dressed up for account maintenance. But Virginia always looked put together. That was part of her brand. I told myself I was reading into things. That is a habit I had carefully trained myself into over 6 years, noticing something, feeling the small electric charge of wrongness that runs along your collarbone when a detail doesn't fit, and then talking myself out of the feeling before it could become a question. Derek called it my tendency to catastrophize. Virginia never said it directly, but the implication was always there. "You're too sensitive, Lucy. You take things too seriously. Not everything means something." The drive to Buckhead took 22 minutes. Virginia talked the whole way about her garden, which was giving her trouble with the camellias, about a woman from her church board who had said something at the last meeting that Virginia was still processing, about Derek's childhood, which she returned to often, always framing it in a way that reminded me gently but unmistakably that she had known him longer and better than I ever would. I watched Atlanta move past the window, and I made the right sounds at the right intervals. First Meridian Private Bank occupied the ground floor of a 12-story glass building off Peachtree Road. The lobby was the color of warm sand with low leather chairs and a chandelier that managed to feel both expensive and tasteful. There was always soft piano music playing from somewhere I never found the speakers. The carpet was thick enough to swallow sound entirely. We were greeted at the door by a man in a charcoal suit who knew Virginia by name and led us to a seating area near the back, away from the main teller windows. That alone should have registered. When I'd come in before for routine things, a cashier's check, once a wire transfer, we'd simply waited in line like anyone else. Being escorted to the back of the bank meant someone was expecting us. Someone had called ahead. A woman in a burgundy blazer came to meet us within 4 minutes. She introduced herself as Patricia, a senior client services manager. She shook Virginia's hand like she knew her. She shook my hand like she was meeting me for the first time, which I understand now. She was in the way that mattered. "Mrs. Calloway, we have everything prepared," Patricia said. She said it to Virginia, not to me, the other Mrs. Calloway in the room. Virginia settled into her chair with the particular ease of someone who had choreographed exactly this moment. Patricia set a leather portfolio on the table and opened it to a set of documents, maybe 8 pages, maybe 10. I couldn't see clearly from where I was sitting. She began to explain something about restructuring beneficiary designations and updating authorized signatories on the joint account and a related business account that I did not recognize the name of. Meridian Home Partners. That was the name on the top of the first document Patricia slid across the table. I had never heard Derek mention a company called Meridian Home Partners. I had never signed anything for a company called Meridian Home Partners. But there it was, printed on bank letterhead, with my name listed in a column next to Derek's as a co-owner of record. "This is just to bring the paperwork current," Virginia said, not looking at the documents, looking at me. "Derek already signed his portion. We just need your signature on a few pages to make it official." Patricia uncapped a pen and set it near my right hand on the table. I picked it up. The pen was a heavy matte black roller ball. I remember the weight of it specifically. I remember thinking it was the kind of pen that felt important, the kind of pen that made whatever you signed with it feel permanent. I was looking at the first page. The font was small. The language was dense. I am not a lawyer, but I have read enough contracts in my professional life to know that authorized signatory and transfer of interest and primary account holder restructuring are not phrases that belong in routine paperwork. I was still trying to parse the first paragraph when I felt something touch my left hand. Not Virginia. Patricia was on my right. Virginia was across the table. I looked down. A folded square of paper, maybe 2 inches by 2 inches, pressed quickly into my left palm from slightly behind and to the left. I hadn't heard anyone approach. I closed my hand around it on instinct, the way you close your hand around something falling before you've decided to catch it. I looked up. A young woman in a white button-down was already walking away, back toward the teller windows, her pace completely unhurried, as if she had done nothing more than pass through the room on her way to somewhere else. She didn't look back. Virginia was talking. Something about how straightforward this all was, how Derek had explained everything, how this was really just a formality. I set the pen down. "I'm sorry," I said. My voice came out even. I was grateful for that. "I'm feeling a little lightheaded. Can I step outside for just a moment?" Virginia's expression didn't change immediately. There was a half-second delay, the kind of delay that happens when someone runs a quick calculation and determines that objecting would draw more attention than agreeing. "Of course," she said. "Take your time." I stood. I walked toward the lobby. I pushed through the front door into the sharp March air and kept walking until I reached the parking garage and found my car on level 2. I sat down. I closed the door. I opened my hand. "Don't sign anything. Call a lawyer first." Outside through the windshield, Atlanta looked exactly the same as it had 22 minutes ago. But I was not the same woman who had driven here. Something had just shifted in a way I did not yet have words for, but my body already understood completely. My sister Diane picked up on the second ring. That is not always guaranteed. Diane Caldwell Pierce is a corporate attorney at a firm on Peachtree Street, 12 minutes from the bank where I was currently sitting in a parking garage on level 2 with the engine running and a stranger's handwriting pressed into my palm. She bills in 6-minute increments and guards her phone like a border checkpoint. But she picked up on the second ring, which meant she was between meetings, which meant for once in my life, the timing was right. I said, "I need you to pull everything on a company called Meridian Home Partners. And I need you to tell me if my name is on it." Silence. 3 seconds, maybe 4. "Where are you right now?" "Parking garage, First Meridian Bank, Buckhead branch." Another silence. Shorter. "Don't go back inside. Don't sign anything. I'll call you back in 20 minutes. She hung up before I could tell her someone at the bank had already said the first part. I sat in the car for 19 minutes and 40 seconds. I know because I watched the clock on the dashboard without meaning to, the way you watch a clock when time feels like a physical substance pressing against you from all sides. At some point my phone buzzed with a text from Virginia, "Whenever you're ready, dear." No rush. The deer landed like a thumbtack. At minute 12, Virginia walked through the parking garage. She didn't see my car. I was on the far side of level 2, tucked behind an SUV. But I watched her move through the concrete space in that navy suit, unhurried checking her phone. She looked like a woman who had done this before. The thought arrived with a clarity that surprised me. Not a suspicion, a recognition. She went back inside. Diane called back at minute 19. She didn't say hello. She said, "Lucy, Meridian Home Partners LLC was registered with the Georgia Secretary of State 14 months ago. Listed owners of record are Derek Raymond Calloway and Lucille Ann Calloway. Your home address is listed as the principal business address." I heard myself breathe. I never signed anything for that company. I know. A pause. "Your signature is on the formation documents anyway." The inside of the car felt very small. Outside, someone pulled into the space 2 rows over, got out, walked toward the elevator, disappeared. Normal Tuesday morning. People going to banks, people handling their business. Everything ordinary, except the specific thing happening to me. "What does the company hold?" I asked. That's what I'm still pulling. But Lucy, the name. Meridian Home Partners, the Cascade Heights house. "What's the address?" I told her. She made a sound that was not quite a word. "The property is listed as an asset of the LLC. Our house. The house I bought with my grandmother's money. $340,000 from a woman who worked as a home health aide for 31 years and saved with a discipline that still makes me catch my breath when I think about it. My grandmother, Hattie Ann Carter, who pressed the inheritance paperwork into my hands at her kitchen table 8 months before she died, and said, "This is for something real, Lucy. Don't let anyone talk you into something small." I had let someone put it into a company I didn't know existed. "Can they do this?" I asked. I knew the answer. I needed to hear her say it. "Not without your consent, which means either you signed something at some point that you didn't fully understand or my signature was forged." That would be my working assumption right now, yes. I looked at the matte black rollerball pen I had set down on the bank table 27 minutes ago. I had not taken it with me, but I could still feel the weight of it in my hand. I understood now what I had almost done. I had almost walked into a trap built specifically to use my own hand to close it around me. The documents Virginia had laid out, the ones Patricia had arranged so neatly in that leather portfolio, were not maintenance paperwork. They were ratification documents. If I had signed them, I would have legally confirmed my knowledge of and participation in Meridian Home Partners. The forged signatures on the formation documents would have become retroactively plausible. Any future claim I made about not knowing would have collapsed under the weight of my own pen. They had built the trap to be sprung by my own signature. "Diane," I said. "Yeah. How fast can you move on this? How fast do you need me to?" I thought about Virginia in that navy suit walking back into the bank lobby. I thought about Derek at his so-called site visit in Decatur. probably waiting for a phone call telling him it was done. I thought about 6 years of signed paperwork I hadn't read carefully enough. 6 years of Derek handles the finances, and Virginia has good instincts, and you're making this weird Lucy. Fast, I said. But not yet. I need a few days. I need them to think it's still going. Diane was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted into the register I recognized, from when she described her most complicated cases, focused almost cold, the voice of someone who has stopped feeling and started building. Then go back in there, she said. Tell Virginia you're feeling better. Tell her you need to reschedule for later in the week because you want Derek to be there when you sign. Make it sound like you just want it to be a family moment. I almost laughed. A family moment. That'll buy you 3, maybe 4 days before they push again, Diane said. That's enough. I put the phone in my bag. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked like myself. That seemed important, that I looked like myself. That nothing on the outside had changed, that I could walk back into that lobby and perform the version of Lucy Calloway that Virginia and Derek had always counted on. The agreeable one. The one who said yes and deferred and didn't ask enough questions. I could do that. I had been doing it for 6 years. The difference was that this time I would be doing it on purpose. I got out of the car. I took the elevator down to the lobby level. I pushed through the glass door into the warm sand interior with its soft piano music and its light that managed to feel both expensive and tasteful. Virginia was seated exactly where I'd left her phone. In hand, the leather portfolio still open on the table. She looked up when she saw me. Her expression assembled itself into something warm and concerned. Feeling better? A little, I said, sitting down. I'm so sorry about that. I think I skipped breakfast. I smiled. It felt entirely natural. Virginia, would it be okay if we rescheduled for later this week? I'd really love for Derek to be there when we make this official. You know how he is. He likes to be part of things. Something moved behind Virginia's eyes. A calculation quick and almost imperceptible. Then it settled. Of course, she said. Whatever makes you comfortable, dear. She closed the portfolio. Patricia collected it without expression. We walked out into the March afternoon together, and Virginia talked the whole way to the car about her camellias, about the church board, about Derek's childhood. I made the right sounds at the right intervals. But the note was still in my coat pocket. And Diane was already working. I did not tell Derek that evening. That was the hardest part. Not the fear, not the grief, not even the specific nauseating arithmetic of realizing your husband had helped engineer a trap designed to use your own hand against you. The hardest part was sitting across from him at the kitchen table at 7:15 p.m. while he ate the chicken and rice I'd made on autopilot, watching him perform normalcy with the ease of someone who had been practicing for a long time and saying nothing. He asked how the bank visit went. I said Virginia and I had to reschedule, that I hadn't been feeling well. He said, "Oh, that's too bad. You should have called me." I said, "I didn't want to interrupt your site visit." He said, "You never interrupt me, Lucy. You know that." I looked at him across the table, at the gold signet ring on his right hand, at the way he held his fork relaxed, unhurried, the way a man holds a fork when he has no reason to be nervous. I thought about the $340,000 from my grandmother's hands into mine. I thought about the formation documents for a company I'd never heard of, bearing my name in handwriting that was almost mine, but wasn't the way a photocopy is almost a thing, but isn't. I said, "I know. We watched television after dinner." He fell asleep on the couch by 9. I sat next to him for 20 minutes, watching his chest rise and fall. And I felt something I did not expect, not rage, not sorrow, but a strange and clarifying calm. The kind of calm that arrives when you have finally stopped hoping you misunderstood something. I went to the bedroom. I called Diane from the closet with the door closed and the white noise app on my phone running at full volume. She had spent the afternoon building the file. Meridian Home Partners, LLC, had been formed 14 months ago using an Atlanta-based registered agent that Diane recognized from other asset shielding cases she'd handled. The formation documents listed Lucy and Derek as equal owners, but the operating agreement, which Diane had obtained through a contact at the Secretary of State's office, gave Derek unilateral authority over all financial decisions. Lucy's ownership was structural, not functional. Her name was there to legitimize the vehicle. Her authority was there to be used once and then bypassed entirely. The house in Cascade Heights had been transferred into the LLC 9 months ago via a quitclaim deed. The deed bore Lucy's signature. She had not signed a quitclaim deed 9 months ago. She had not signed anything 9 months ago except a birthday card for Derek's cousin and a permission slip for a charity auction she'd co-chaired. "The forgery is good," Diane said. "Not perfect. Our handwriting analyst will pull it apart, but it's good enough to pass a casual review. They were counting on no one looking closely." "They were counting on me signing at the bank," I said. "Yes. Once you ratified the LLC documents, the quitclaim becomes almost impossible to challenge. You'd have confirmed you knew about the company. Any claim that you didn't sign the deed would read as inconsistent." I sat on the closet floor with my back against the wall, and Derek's shirts hanging above me, and I worked through the full shape of it. The house transferred into the LLC. The LLC set up to be restructured, which was what the bank paperwork was for, Diane explained. They were moving the LLC's assets into a new holding structure. Once that transfer was complete and Lucy had signed off on it, the original property contribution, her grandmother's money. Her house would be buried 3 entities deep in a structure she had no practical authority over. They had been building this for over a year. "What do we do?" I asked. Diane's answer was methodical. She had already contacted a forensic accountant she trusted. She had already drafted a preservation letter to First Meridian Bank, requiring them to retain all account records related to both the joint account and any accounts associated with Meridian Home Partners. She had already identified the judge she would approach for an emergency injunction if Derek or Virginia attempted to move any assets in the interim. "What I need from you," she said, "is to keep your behavior completely unchanged for the next 72 hours. No confrontations, no changed passwords. No sudden interest in the finances that you haven't shown before. Can you do that?" I thought about the kitchen table, the chicken and rice, the fork held with the ease of a man with no reason to be nervous. "Yes," I said. "Lucy." Her voice dropped slightly, not softer, more precise. "I need you to understand something. What they did is serious. The forgery alone is a felony. But the way we handle the next 3 days will determine how much of this we can prove in a way that holds. If you move too fast, they'll shift assets. If you move wrong, you give them room to claim confusion or clerical error. This has to be done in order." "I understand." "Do you?" "Diane." I said her name the way she'd said mine, not gently, just precisely. "I've been patient for 6 years. I can manage 72 hours. She exhaled, something between a laugh and relief. I hung up and sat on the closet floor for a while longer, in the dark, with Derek's shirts above me and the white noise running and the house quiet around me, the way houses are quiet at 10 p.m. When everyone thinks they're safe. I thought about the woman who had pressed a note into my palm at the bank, Renee. I didn't know her last name. I didn't know how she had known to warn me, whether she had seen the documents, whether she had recognized the trap, whether someone had said something, whether she had simply read something in Virginia's posture that I had been too close to see clearly. I thought about what it meant that a stranger had seen my situation more clearly than I had. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because in the stories we tell about women being betrayed, there is always a crying scene, usually in a bathroom, usually on the floor. I did not cry on the closet floor. I felt something, but it was not grief exactly. It was closer to the feeling of a fog, lifting cold and disorienting at first, and then underneath the cold, something that was almost relief. I had not been wrong about the small things. I had not been catastrophizing. The feeling in my collarbone, every time a detail didn't fit that small electric charge I had spent 6 years learning to dismiss, had been accurate every single time. I stood up. I put my phone in my pocket. I opened the closet door. Derek was still asleep on the couch. I could hear the television from the hallway, some late-night program, the sound low and blurred. I went to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. I stood at the sink and looked out at the backyard, the camellias Virginia had planted along the fence line 3 years ago, uninvited as a gift, and which I had always quietly resented without understanding why. Now I understood why. She had planted them in my yard to have a reason to keep coming back. I finished the water. I rinsed the glass. I set it on the drying rack with the particular care of someone who has decided to stop wasting motion on things that don't matter and start conserving it entirely for what does. 72 hours. Then we would see exactly what the Callaways had built and exactly what it was worth when someone finally decided to look at it closely. The call came Thursday morning at 8:52 a.m. I was in the parking lot of a Publix on Cascade Road, sitting in my car with a coffee I hadn't touched, when Virginia's name appeared on my screen. I had been expecting it. Diane had predicted they would push by Thursday, 4 days after the bank visit, close enough to feel urgent, far enough to not seem panicked. Virginia was precise about these things. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Lucy, dear, I wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "Much better, thank you." "Wonderful." A half-beat pause, the pause of someone consulting an internal script. "I was thinking, since Derek has a lighter schedule tomorrow, perhaps we could pop back into the bank and take care of that paperwork. Get it off all our plates." Get it off all our plates. As if it were a shared inconvenience. As if the paperwork were something that had happened to all of us equally. "That sounds fine," I said. "What time were you thinking?" 11. Patricia said she can have everything ready." Patricia? Who had arranged the leather portfolio? Who had set the pen near my right hand? 11 works, I said. "I'll be there." I hung up and called Diane. She answered mid-first ring. "Virginia. Tomorrow at 11. First Meridian Buckhead." "Good." I heard her typing. "That gives us tonight. The injunction is ready. The forensic accountant finished his preliminary report this morning. He found 3 additional transfers out of the joint account into Meridian Home Partners over the past 8 months. Small amounts structured to stay under the reporting threshold. $8, $400. $9, $200. $7, $750. I did the arithmetic without meaning to. $25,000, I said. $25,350, Diane said. Moved in increments small enough to avoid automatic flags. That's not careless accounting, Lucy. That's deliberate structuring. That's a federal issue on top of everything else. I sat in the Publix parking lot and watched a woman load groceries into a minivan. And I thought about Derek at the kitchen table, fork held easy, asking if I was feeling better. I thought about how fluently he had performed concern. How practiced the worry in his eyes had looked. "How long has he been doing this?" I asked. "Conservatively, we can document 14 months. But the registered agent he used for Meridian Home Partners has handled similar structures before. There may be earlier iterations we haven't found yet." Earlier iterations. The phrase sat in my chest like a stone. "Diane, the house. Are we going to get it back?" A beat. My sister does not offer comfort she cannot substantiate. It is one of the things I most rely on about her. The forged quitclaim deed makes the transfer fraudulent. Combined with the forged LLC formation signatures, we have a strong case for full rescission. Yes, we're going to get the house back. I exhaled. Okay, I said. What do I do tonight? Nothing. Go home, make dinner, watch television, act like a woman who is going to the bank tomorrow to sign some paperwork. I went home. I made dinner pasta this time, simple, the kind of meal that requires just enough attention to keep your hands busy without demanding anything from your mind. Derek came home at 6:30, kissed my cheek, asked what smelled good. He seemed lighter than he had in days, almost cheerful. I understood why. Tomorrow, from his perspective, was the end of a very long project. We ate. He told me about a property he was looking at in Smyrna, a mixed-use development opportunity potentially significant. He used words like upside and positioning and long-term hold. I asked reasonable questions. He answered them with the enthusiasm of a man who believed completely that the ground beneath him was solid. After dinner, he poured 2 glasses of wine and handed me one and said, I know things have felt a little complicated lately. I just want you to know I'm handling it. All of it. I looked at him over the rim of my glass. I know you are, I said. He smiled. He touched my hand briefly, the gold signet ring cool against my fingers, and then he picked up his phone and moved to the couch. I washed the dishes. The next morning, I dressed carefully. Not dramatically, no armor, no statement. I wore what I would wear to a meeting I'd prepared thoroughly for dark trousers, a charcoal silk blouse, low block heels. I put my hair up. I put the folded note from Renee in my left coat pocket where it had been since Tuesday, a habit I hadn't examined until that moment. I examined it now. I kept it there. Derek met me in the kitchen at 10:15. He was in a gray suit, the one he wore for signings and closings, the one Virginia had bought him 2 birthdays ago. He looked handsome and calm and entirely himself. Ready, he said. Ready, I said. We drove to Buckhead in separate cars, Derek ahead me, following the familiar shape of his Audi in my windshield for 12 minutes on Peachtree Road. I watched the back of his head through the glass, and I thought about all the mornings I had followed him, somewhere without question, to dinners I hadn't chosen, to events where Virginia held court, to a bank where a trap had been laid with my name already on it. This was the last time I would follow Derek Calloway anywhere. My phone buzzed at 10:47 as I was turning into the parking garage. Diane injunction filed at 10:30. Judge signed at 10:44. First Meridian has been notified no transactions on the joint account or any Meridian Home Partners accounts pending legal review. You're clear. Go in. I read it twice. I put the phone in my bag. I found a space on level 2. Not the same space as Tuesday, but close. I sat for a moment, engine off the garage. Quiet around me. From somewhere below, I could hear the faint sound of Peachtree Road, the ordinary Thursday morning sound of a city that did not know or care what was about to happen inside a bank lobby 12 floors above street level. I thought about my grandmother, Hattie Ann Carter, who had worked 31 years and saved with the discipline of someone who understood that money was not just money, but time and dignity, and the right to make your own choices, who had pressed an envelope into my hands and said, "This is for something real." I thought about the woman in the white button-down who had pressed a note into my palm without breaking her stride. I thought about Diane, who had spent 4 days building something airtight out of a phone call from a parking garage. I thought about Virginia in the lobby right now in that navy suit with that leather portfolio with Patricia ready and the pen positioned near the right side of the table. I thought about Derek, who had said, "I'm handling it, all of it," and smiled. Then I got out of the car. I took the elevator down. I walked through the glass doors into the warm sand interior, with the soft piano and the chandelier and the carpet that swallowed sound. Virginia was already seated. Derek stood when he saw me, hands easy at his sides, gold ring catching the light. "There she is," he said, like I was arriving at something good. "Here I am," I said. I sat down. Patricia set the leather portfolio on the table and opened it to the first page. I folded my hands in my lap and looked across the table at the two people who had spent 14 months building a structure designed to take everything my grandmother had given me, and I waited for exactly the right moment to take it all back. Patricia set the pen near my right hand. Same pen, same position, same leather portfolio, same cream-colored documents, same careful arrangement of a trap that had taken 14 months to build, and was now from the perspective of everyone at this table, except me, approximately 4 minutes from closing. I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I said, "Before we start, I have a few questions about the documents." A silence moved through the table, like a current. Virginia's expression held. Derek's hand, which had been resting on the arm of his chair, shifted slightly, a small adjustment, almost imperceptible. Patricia looked at Virginia. That look. Patricia looking at Virginia instead of at me, the account holder, the client, the woman whose signature was required. That look confirmed everything Diane had told me and everything I had already known since Tuesday. "Of course," Virginia said. Her voice was exactly right, warm, patient, the voice of a woman with nothing to hide. "What questions do you have, dear?" I reached into my bag and set a folder on the table. It was a plain manila folder, letter-sized, unremarkable. I had carried it in against my right side spine of the folder, pressed flat, nothing about it announcing itself. I set it on the table and opened it and slid the top sheet across to Derek. It was a copy of the Meridian Home Partners LLC formation documents. His signature on page 4. My signature, the other signature, the one I had not made on page 4 beside his. Derek looked at the page. He looked at it the way you look at something when your brain is running a fast and private calculation about how much you already know versus how much the other person knows. "Where did you get this?" he said. "Georgia, Secretary of State," I said. "Public record." I slid the next page across. The quitclaim deed for the Cascade Heights property. My grandmother's house transferred 9 months ago into a company I had never heard of, bearing a signature in my name that I had not written. The room was very quiet. The piano from somewhere in the building was playing something slow. I could hear the carpet absorbing footsteps from another part of the lobby. "Lucy," Derek said. His voice had changed registers. Lower, the warmth gone out of it entirely, like a light switched off. "There's context here you don't have." "I have the context," I said. 14 months of it. I slid the forensic accountant's preliminary report across the table. 3 pages annotated with the 3 transfer amounts highlighted in yellow: $8, $409, $207, $750. The dates, the account numbers, the structuring pattern that kept each transfer below the federal reporting threshold. Derek stared at the highlighted figures. Virginia said, "This is a misunderstanding." She said it with remarkable composure. I will give her that. She said it the way she said everything, with the authority of a woman who had spent 63 years being believed and who had not yet fully processed that this was the first conversation in which that was not going to work. "Virginia," I said. I said her name quietly, not unkindly. "My sister is a corporate attorney. She filed an injunction with Fulton County Superior Court at 10:30 this morning. Judge Hardin signed it at 10:44. First, Meridian has been formally notified no transactions on the joint account or any accounts associated with Meridian Home Partners can be processed pending legal review." I watched her absorb this. The composure held for approximately 4 seconds. Then something shifted behind her eyes. Not collapse, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in a structure that had felt, until this moment, entirely solid. Patricia had gone very still. "I'd like to speak to our attorney," Derek said. "That's your right," I said. "I'd recommend it." I slid the last document across the table. It was a letter from Diane's firm, addressed to Derek Raymond Calloway and Virginia Elaine Calloway, outlining the legal basis for the injunction and the preliminary findings of the forensic accountant, and formally requesting the preservation of all records associated with Meridian Home Partners, the joint account, and any related entities going back 36 months. At the bottom of the letter was a single paragraph I had read 4 times before this morning and had asked Diane to keep in plain language. It said in substance, the forgery of a spouse's signature on a deed transfer is a felony under Georgia law. The structured transfer of marital assets to avoid federal reporting thresholds is a federal offense. The use of a fraudulent LLC to shield marital assets during an anticipated divorce proceeding constitutes fraud upon the court. Derek read it. I watched him read it. I watched the moment he reached the word felony. "This is not what it looks like," he said. That sentence. I had imagined him saying something like, it had run various versions of this conversation in my head during the previous 72 hours, but hearing it aloud, in the warm sand interior of a private bank with the piano playing and the chandelier overhead, hearing him actually say, "This is not what it looks like," produced in me something I had not anticipated. Not rage, not satisfaction, something quieter than both. Clarity. "Derek," I said, "I know exactly what it looks like." Patricia excused herself. I noticed her leave, but I did not watch where she went. Whatever was happening on the bank's side of this table was no longer my primary concern. The injunction had already done what it needed to do. First Meridian's legal exposure was now substantial enough that the institution itself had become an involuntary ally. Virginia had not spoken since I'd named the injunction. She sat across from me with her hands folded on the table and her posture unchanged, still straight, still composed, still the woman who entered rooms and calculated what was owed to her. But something in the space around her had shifted. She seemed for the first time, in 6 years, like a smaller version of herself. I did not feel triumphant about this. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was closer to the feeling of setting down something very heavy that you have been carrying so long you forgot it had weight. "The house," I said. "I want it back. The transfers. All of it. Diane has given you a timeline in the letter." "You're ending the marriage over this," Derek said. I looked at him. At the gray suit Virginia had bought him. At the gold signet ring. At the face of the man who had found me near a silent auction table at 23 and said, "You actually care about that painting," and who had spent the years since carefully, methodically, and with considerable sophistication, building a structure to take from me the things my grandmother had worked 31 years to give. "Derek," I said, "you ended the marriage. I'm just the one willing to say it out loud." I closed the manila folder. I put it back in my bag. I stood. I looked at Virginia one last time. She met my eyes. In all the years I had known her, through all the dinners and church events and holiday tables and camellias planted uninvited in my yard, I had never once felt that she saw me clearly, that she had looked at me and understood what she was looking at. She saw me now. I buttoned my coat. I picked up my bag. I walked out of First Meridian Private Bank for the last time, through the glass doors into the March afternoon, past the man in the charcoal suit who had greeted Virginia by name 11 days ago, past the leather chairs and the chandelier and the piano that was still impossibly playing something slow and unhurried, as if none of this had happened at all. On the sidewalk, I stopped for a moment. The air was cold and bright. Peachtree Road ran in both directions, ordinary and indifferent, full of people going about their Thursday. My phone buzzed. "Diane, how did it go?" I typed back, "They have the letter. Derek wants his attorney." Virginia didn't say a word after I mentioned the injunction. 3 dots. Then perfect. That's exactly what we needed. Come to my office. I put the phone in my pocket. I put my hand in the other pocket and touched the folded note. 4 words, ink slightly smeared on the left edge. The handwriting of a woman I barely knew who had seen something clearly enough to risk her job to tell me, "Don't sign anything." I hadn't. The dinner was Virginia's idea. That is the detail I keep returning to, even now that she planned it. 3 weeks after the bank, 2 weeks after Derek retained his attorney, 10 days after Diane, Utolik filed the formal complaint with the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. Virginia Elaine Calloway sent a group text to 27 members of the extended Calloway family and 4 of Derek's closest business associates, inviting them to Sunday dinner at her home in Collier Hills. The text said, "A family gathering long overdue. 6 o'clock. Dress nicely." She did not invite me. She told Derek to tell me to come. Derek called on a Wednesday evening. I was at Diane's kitchen table going through the forensic accountant's updated report, which had expanded from 3 pages to 11, and which now included 2 additional LLC structures we hadn't found in the first pass, both registered in Delaware, both listing Derek as sole owner, both holding assets that Diane's team was still mapping. "My mother is having people over Sunday," he said. "She'd like you to come." I was quiet for a moment. Diane across the table looked up from her laptop. "Why?" I said. Derek paused. "She wants to talk. She thinks if the family is there, it'll be easier." Easier. Virginia wanted witnesses. She wanted the weight of the family around her like a wall. She was going to try to do in her living room what she hadn't been able to do in the bank, use the pressure of the room to make me smaller, to remind me of everything I stood to lose by not going along to reframe what had happened as a misunderstanding between people who loved each other and simply needed to talk it through over a meal. She had miscalculated. Again. "Tell her I'll be there," I said. Diane looked at me across the table. I mouthed, "I need a favor." She closed her laptop. Sunday came in cold and overcast the sky, the particular gray of Atlanta in early April when spring hasn't fully decided to arrive. I drove to Collier Hills alone. Diane's car was already parked 2 blocks away around a corner Virginia would not think to look at. Virginia's house was a large colonial revival on a corner lot, the kind of house that announced its own history. White columns, deep porch, camellias along the front walk, of course. The windows were warm and lit. And through the front glass I could see movement silhouettes, the assembled geometry of a family that had been told to dress nicely and had complied. I sat in my car for 90 seconds. I was wearing a white dress. Not white, like a statement, just white. A structured shift dress in ivory silk that had been hanging in my closet for 2 years, bought for a charity event I'd attended with Derek early in the marriage. I had put it on that morning, without deliberating over it, and it was only as I was driving that I realized it was the same dress I'd been wearing the night Derek found me, near the silent auction table, and said, "You actually care about that painting." I left it on. I rang the doorbell at 5:58 p.m. Virginia answered personally. She was in the navy suit, of course she was. This was a consequential morning in an evening's clothing. And for a moment we simply looked at each other on the porch in the cold April air. Then she stepped back and let me in. The living room was full. Derek's Aunt Rosalind, who I had always liked. His cousin Marcus, from Charlotte, who I had met 4 times and who always called me Laura by mistake. 2 men I recognized as Derek's development partners, James Whitfield, and a younger man named Carter, whose last name I couldn't remember. Several faces I knew less well, cousins and family friends, the assembled texture of a family's social world. Derek was near the fireplace. He saw me come in, and something moved across his face that I couldn't fully read. Not guilt exactly, more like the expression of a man watching a variable he thought he'd controlled walk through his mother's front door in an ivory dress. Virginia guided me to a seat near the center of the room, strategic, visible from all angles. "Thank you all for coming," Virginia said, standing near the mantel in her navy suit, addressing the room with the practiced ease of someone who had chaired enough board meetings to make any gathering feel like one. "I wanted us to be together because family matters most when things are complicated. Derek and Lucy are going through a difficult time, and I believe in handling family matters within the family." Murmurs of assent. Rosalind nodded. Carter looked at his shoes. Virginia turned to me. "Lucy, we'd like the chance to speak honestly. I think there's been a misunderstanding that with clear heads and open hearts, we can resolve." The room looked at me. I let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds. Then I reached into my bag and set a document on the coffee table in front of me. I set it face upturned so the people nearest to me could read it. Then I set down a second document beside it. Then a third. "I'd like to speak honestly too," I said. "So let's start with these." James Whitfield leaned forward slightly. He was a careful man. I'd always sensed that about him, the kind of man who read things before he responded to them. He read the top of the first document. Then he read it again. "Derek," he said slowly, "what is Meridian Home Partners?" The room temperature changed, not dramatically, just changed. Derek said, "James, this isn't the place. Is this a company you set up using the Cascade Heights property as an asset? There's context. Is Lucy's signature on the formation documents?" James's voice was still measured. He was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. "Because she's sitting right here, and I'd like to hear from her whether she signed this." The room looked at me. "I did not," I said. Rosalind made a sound. Small, involuntary. "The signature was forged," I said, "along with a quit-claim deed transferring my home, the home I purchased with my inheritance, into this company 9 months ago. Without my knowledge, without my consent." Virginia said, "Lucy, I think you need to be very careful about the words you're using. A forensic handwriting analyst has confirmed the signatures are not mine," I said. "The Fulton County District Attorney's Office received Diane's complaint 10 days ago. Federal structuring violations have been referred to the appropriate agency." I set down the fourth document. The forensic analyst's summary 1-page conclusion highlighted in yellow. Carter stood up. Not dramatically, he just stood the way people stand when they've decided they need to be somewhere else. I have to make a call," he said to no one specifically, and walked toward the hallway. James Whitfield did not stand. He sat very still reading the forensic report, and his stillness was louder than Carter's exit. "Derek," James said without looking up from the page, "we have a signed MOU on the Smyrna development. If there's a federal referral with your name on it, I need to know that right now." James. "Right now, Derek." The fireplace crackled. Someone's phone buzzed and was immediately silenced. Derek looked at me. For the first time since the bank, he looked at me without calculation, without performance, without the easy warmth he had deployed so fluently for so many years. He looked at me the way people look when they finally understand that the thing they built is coming apart, and there is nothing left to do but watch. Virginia had not moved from her position near the mantel. She stood with her hands at her sides in the navy suit, and she was looking at me with an expression I'd not seen on her face before. Not anger, not calculation. Not the composed authority she wore like a second skin. It was the expression of a woman who had spent 63 years being the most powerful person in every room she entered, and who was standing in her own living room, understanding for the first time that this was no longer that room. I picked up my documents. I put them back in my bag. I looked at Rosalind, who was watching me with an expression I couldn't parse, something between devastation and underneath it, a recognition that looked almost like relief. I stood. "I'm sorry to have done this here," I said to the room. And I meant it. Not for the documents, not for the truth, but for Rosalind, for the cousins, for the assembled family who had dressed nicely on a Sunday and driven to Collier Hills, not knowing they were walking into the last hour of something. I buttoned my coat. I walked to the front door. Behind me, I heard James Whitfield say very quietly, "Derek, I need you to call me tomorrow morning. First thing." I opened the front door. The cold April air hit my face. On the porch, I stopped for one breath, just one, and looked out at the camellias lining the front walk, pale and precise in the evening dark. Then I walked to my car. 2 blocks away, Diane's phone lit up with my text, "Done." Her reply came in 11 seconds. How bad I started the engine. Bad enough, I typed back. Exactly as bad as it needed to be. James Whitfield called Derek at 7:14 Monday morning. I know the time because Diane had already filed the emergency motion to freeze the Smyrna Development MOU pending legal review. And James's attorney called Diane's office at 7:31 to confirm they were withdrawing. 17 minutes between James picking up his phone and his attorney making that call. That is how fast a man with James Whitfield's legal exposure can move when he finally understands what he's standing next to. Derek called me at 8:02. I did not answer. He called again at 8:19. At 8:34. At 8:51, he sent a text, "Lucy, we need to talk. Please." At 9:07, he sent another, "I made mistakes. I know that. But there's a way through this that doesn't destroy everything." At 9:23, "Please just call me." I read each one. I set my phone face down on Diane's kitchen table and went back to the document I was reviewing, the updated forensic accountant report. Now 14 pages, now including the 2 Delaware LLCs and a third structure registered in Nevada that none of us had found until 48 hours ago. The Nevada LLC held a commercial property in Smyrna. Not the development site, a separate parcel adjacent purchased 18 months ago in Derek's name alone, using funds that the forensic accountant had traced with reasonable certainty back to transfers from the joint account that predated Meridian Home Partners entirely. This had been going on longer than 14 months. Diane set a coffee in front of me without being asked. She sat across the table and opened her own copy of the report, and we worked in silence for an hour, the way we had worked in silence as children doing homework at the same kitchen table in our mother's house. In Vine City, Diane always 3 steps ahead, always willing to sit beside me while I caught up. At 10:15, her phone rang. She looked at the screen, then at me. "It's Virginia's attorney," she said. I nodded. She answered, put it on speaker, set it between us on the table. The attorney, a man named Prescott, whom Diane knew professionally and described as expensive and competent, but not creative, spoke for 4 minutes. He used words like good faith resolution and mutual interest, and avoid unnecessary escalation. What he meant, translated out of the language of people who are paid to make retreats sound like advances, was this: Virginia wanted to negotiate. Diane said, "My client's position is in the filing. Mr. Prescott, full rescission of the Meridian Home Partners transfer, return of all marital assets, including the Cascade Heights property, restitution for the structured transfers. She's not negotiating the core terms." Prescott said, "There may be room for—" "There isn't," Diane said pleasantly. "But please do call back if the position changes." She hung up. We looked at each other across the table. "She's scared," I said. "She should be," Diane said. "The DA's office called me this morning. They're moving forward. The forgery alone is enough. The structuring referral to the feds is separate. Virginia's fingerprints are on the LLC formation process. She introduced Derek to the registered agent. She was present at the bank. Her attorney knows exactly what she's facing. I thought about Virginia standing at her mantel in the navy suit Sunday evening, watching the room shift around her. I thought about her hands at her sides. I had spent 6 years studying Virginia Calloway's hands, the way they moved when she was confident, quick, and deliberate, the way they stilled when she was calculating. On Sunday, they had simply hung at her sides motionless, and that stillness had told me more than anything she had said or not said. "What about James Whitfield?" I asked. His attorney confirmed this morning he's withdrawing from the Smyrna MOU and will cooperate fully with any inquiry into the development finances. He's not a target. He's a witness. And Carter, Diane allowed herself a small, precise smile. Carter's last name is Reeves. His family has a construction business that did significant work on 2 of Derek's recent projects. He called his father Monday morning. His father called their attorney Monday afternoon. Their attorney called the DA's office this morning. Another witness. The structure Derek and Virginia had built 14 months of careful architecture. 3 LLCs forged signatures, structured transfers, a trap baited with bank paperwork, and sprung by a stranger's note, was coming apart, not in one dramatic moment, but in the way these things always come apart. Incrementally, each piece pulling the next, the whole thing dismantling itself in the ordinary business hours of a Monday morning in Atlanta. Derek's attorney called Diane at 2:30 p.m. His name was Gerald Okafor, whom Diane also knew, and who was, she told me afterward, audibly uncomfortable. He spoke for 7 minutes. His client, he said, wished to acknowledge certain irregularities in the handling of marital assets. His client was prepared to discuss full cooperation with the forensic accounting process. His client understood that the criminal referrals were now outside his ability to address through civil negotiation, but wished to express his willingness to make Lucy whole on the civil side as expeditiously as possible. Make Lucy whole. The phrase arrived in my ear, and I felt something tighten briefly in my chest and then release. "Tell Mr. Okafor," I said to Diane, "that I appreciate his client's willingness to cooperate. Tell him the timeline is in the filing." Diane relayed this. Okafor said he understood. He asked delicately whether there was any possibility of Lucy's cooperation with the criminal investigation being characterized in a way that reflected Derek's remorse. Diane looked at me. I thought about the kitchen table. The fork held easy. "I'm handling it, Lucy. All of it." The smile. "No," I said. Diane told him no. By Tuesday morning, the first domino had pulled the second, and the second had pulled the third, and the sequence had acquired its own momentum, entirely independent of anything I needed to do. The Smyrna development, without James Whitfield's capital and with a pending legal cloud over the adjacent parcel, collapsed as a viable project. Derek's other active deal, a residential conversion in Grant Park that had been in late-stage financing, fell apart when the lender's due diligence turned up the DA referral. The lender sent a formal notice of withdrawal by certified mail, which arrived at the Cascade Heights house on Wednesday morning, and which Derek, who was no longer living there, did not receive because I had changed the locks on Monday afternoon. I had called a locksmith at 11 a.m. Monday. The locksmith, a quiet man named Terry, who had a business card that said Terry's Lock and Key Serving Atlanta. Since 2003 arrived at noon, changed all 4 exterior locks, and was gone by 12:45. I stood in the kitchen after he left and held the new keys in my hand and thought about how simple that had been. How one phone call in 45 minutes had restored something that 6 years of marriage had quietly removed. Thursday brought news from Diane that the Nevada LLC's commercial property had been flagged in the federal structuring inquiry. Friday brought a call from Rosalind Derek's aunt, whom I answered. She said, "I want you to know I had no idea." I said, "I know Rosalind." She said, "Is there anything I can do?" I thought about it. "No," I said, "but thank you for calling." She said, "What he did," and then stopped. Started again. "What they did. It wasn't right, Lucy. It wasn't right, and I want you to know that I know that." I said, "That means something to me." "It did. It does." I have thought about that call more than I expected to, not because I needed Rosalind's validation, but because there is a specific kind of loneliness in being wronged by a family and a specific kind of relief in hearing one member of that family say simply and without elaboration, "I know." Virginia's attorney called back on Friday afternoon. The position had changed. Diane called me at 5:47 p.m. I was at the Cascade Heights house in the kitchen, standing at the sink the way I had stood 10 days ago, looking out at the camellias. The light was different now, late afternoon April, warmer, the sky going amber over the backyard fence. "Virginia is prepared to accept full civil liability for her role in the LLC formation and the bank transaction," Diane said. "She's also agreed to provide a written statement to the DA's office. Prescott says she's hoping cooperation will be considered in the criminal determination." "Will it be?" "That's up to the DA. But yes, probably." I looked out at the camellias. Virginia's camellias planted 3 years ago in my yard as a gift, as a reason to keep coming back, as a small flag planted in territory she had already decided was hers. They were blooming. Pale pink, precise, exactly as she had intended them to be. "Diane," I said. "Yeah." "When the house comes back to me, when the transfer is rescinded and the title is clear, I'm going to dig up those camellias." A pause. Then, in a voice that was trying not to smile, and not entirely succeeding, "I'll come help?" "I know you will," I said. Outside, the amber light held for another few minutes over the backyard, and then the sun moved, and it was just an ordinary Atlanta evening in April, neither dramatic nor particularly beautiful. Just the ordinary light of a day ending in a city that did not know or care what had been dismantled inside it over the course of a single week. But I knew, and for right now, that was enough. The title came back to me on a Thursday in May. Diane called at 11:23 a.m. while I was in a meeting at the real estate firm, where I had quietly, without announcement, begun working longer hours again. Not because I needed to perform recovery for anyone watching, because work had always been the place where I understood the rules, where the value of a thing could be assessed without sentiment, where I knew how to move. "Fulton County just recorded the rescission deed," she said. "The Cascade Heights property is back in your name. Solely." I excused myself from the meeting. I walked to the end of the hallway where the windows looked out over Midtown, and I stood there for a moment, with the phone against my ear, and Atlanta spread below me in the May sunshine, and I said, "Say that again." She said it again. I did not cry in that hallway, but I stood there longer than I needed to, and the woman who passed behind me on her way to the copy room probably noticed, and I did not particularly care. The rescission had taken 6 weeks from the Sunday dinner in Collier Hills to the recorded deed. 6 weeks during which Diane's team and the forensic accountant and 2 federal agencies and the Fulton County DA's office had been moving through the structure Derek and Virginia had built, not quickly, but thoroughly, the way you dismantle something carefully when you intend to understand every piece of it before you're done. What they found in total: 3 LLCs across 2 states. The Cascade Heights house, the Nevada commercial parcel, $25,350 in structured transfers from the joint account. A 4th transfer identified late of $11,000 routed through the Delaware entity. A pattern of asset movement going back in the forensic accountant's conservative estimate to the 3rd year of the marriage. The 3rd year, I have done the math on this more times than is useful. In the 3rd year of our marriage, I had just been promoted at the firm. I was earning more than I had before. I had recently updated the beneficiary designations on my retirement accounts. Derek had suggested we consolidate our finances more fully, one joint account, for everything easier to manage, simpler at tax time. I had agreed because it made sense, because he understood these things, because I trusted him. That was the year it started. I do not dwell on this. I have made a deliberate decision not to dwell on it, not because it doesn't matter, but because the arithmetic of how long and how much serves no purpose that the legal documents haven't already served more precisely. What the forensic accountant calculated, what the DA's office recorded, what Diane put into filings, that is the official accounting. My own internal accounting I have chosen to close. Derek entered a plea agreement in late May. The terms cooperation with the federal structuring investigation, full civil restitution, a guilty plea to 1 count of forgery in the first degree under Georgia law. Gerald Okafor presented it to Diane as a reasonable outcome. Diane presented it to me without editorializing. I accepted it without satisfaction or dissatisfaction, which is not the same as not feeling anything. It is the feeling of a thing ending in the correct way, not the way you imagined, not with the clarity you hoped for, but correctly in the way that allows the next thing to begin. Virginia's situation was more complicated. She did not enter a plea. Her attorney, Prescott, still expensive, still not creative, negotiated her cooperation agreement with the DA's office over 4 weeks. In the end, she provided a written statement confirming her role in introducing Derek to the registered agent, her presence at the First Meridian Bank meeting, and her knowledge of the LLC structure. In exchange, the DA's office agreed to consider her cooperation in determining charges. As of the moment, I am telling this story, that determination has not been finalized. What I know is that Virginia Elaine Calloway has not called me since the Sunday dinner in Collier Hills, has not sent a text, has not appeared at my door. The cream stationery with the handwritten notes, the ones that arrived within 48 hours of funerals, the ones everyone in the Calloway circle described as a mark of her particular grace, has not produced a single envelope addressed to me. I find I have no feeling about this either way. James Whitfield I encountered once in June at an industry event downtown. He saw me across the room and came over directly, which I respected. He said, "I should have asked more questions a long time ago." I said, "Yes." He nodded and moved on. And that was the entirety of it. Not absolution, not apology, exactly just a man acknowledging a true thing, simply, and moving forward. I appreciated the economy of it. Carter Reeves. I have not seen since he stood up and walked toward the hallway at Virginia's dinner. His family's construction business is by all accounts fine. His father's cooperation with the inquiry was noted. I have no particular feeling about the Reeves family. Rosalind sent me flowers when the title transfer was recorded. Just flowers, no note, which was exactly right. Stargazer lilies in a tall glass vase delivered to my office on a Thursday afternoon. I kept them on my desk until Friday. The person I thought about most in those weeks was not Derek, was not Virginia, was not Diane, who had been so present and so essential that thinking about her felt less like memory and more like breathing something I was doing constantly without marking it. I thought about Renee, the woman in the white button-down who had pressed a note into my palm without breaking her stride, who had seen something from behind a teller window that I had not been able to see from inside, of my own marriage, who had taken a risk, a real one, a job-level risk, to write 4 words on a square of paper and put them in the hand of a woman she did not know. I had asked Diane early on whether we could find out who she was. Diane had said it was possible, but complicated First Meridian would not identify an employee voluntarily, and a formal request would require more process than the outcome warranted. I had let it go because there was too much else moving. But I had not forgotten. In June, 3 weeks after the title transfer, I walked into First Meridian Private Bank at Buckhead for the last time with a professional purpose. Not to conduct a transaction, to close the joint account which Diane had advised me to do once the legal dust had settled enough. I brought my identification and the court order and Diane's associate, A precise young woman named Keisha, who handled these things with a calm efficiency I found deeply reassuring. The teller who processed the account closure was not Renee. But when we were done, when the account was closed and the paperwork signed and Keisha was organizing the documents in her bag, I asked the teller quietly, not in a way that demanded anything, whether a woman named Renee still worked at this branch. The teller looked at me for a moment. "She transferred to our Midtown location," she said. "About a month ago. She got promoted. She's a client services associate now." I said, "Good." I meant it completely. Outside on Peachtree Road, I stood for a moment in the June heat, which was the full Atlanta summer heat, now dense and immediate. Nothing like the sharp March air of the first time I'd walked out of those doors. The city looked the same as it always had. The same glass and concrete and afternoon traffic, and the particular quality of Atlanta light in summer, golden and slightly hazy, the kind of light that makes even ordinary things look considered. I had one more thing to do before I was finished with First Meridian Bank entirely. I found the Midtown branch address on my phone. It was 11 minutes away. I drove there. I walked in and asked for Renee at the client services desk. A woman in a white button-down, the same white button-down, or one exactly like it, looked up from her station. She was younger than I'd fully registered at the Buckhead branch, mid-20s maybe, with close-cropped natural hair and careful eyes that assessed the situation in the time it took to say hello. "I'm Lucy Calloway," I said. "You gave me a note." She was very still for a moment. Then she said, "I wasn't sure you got away." "I got away," I said. I had not planned what came next. I had not rehearsed it or thought about what the right thing to say was. I simply told her, standing at the client services desk of a Midtown bank branch on a Thursday in June, what had happened. Not all of it, the broad shape of it. What the note had stopped. What Diane had built. What had been returned to me. Renee listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "When I saw those documents," she said, "I recognized the structure. It had happened to someone I knew. Not exactly the same, but close enough." "I know," I said. Because Diane had mentioned this possibility early on, that Renee had flagged the transaction not from procedure, but from pattern recognition. From having seen the shape of this kind of harm before in someone else's life. "I'm glad you ran," Renee said. "I faked a headache," I said. "I didn't run exactly." She smiled. It was a good smile, small and real, the smile of someone who didn't deploy it casually. I thanked her. Not at length. Thanking someone at length, I have found, is often more about the person doing the thanking than the person being thanked. I kept it brief, and I meant every word of it, and then I left. In the car, I sat for a moment in the Midtown parking lot. My phone had 3 unread emails, 2 work texts, and a reminder from Diane about a call tomorrow morning. The ordinary machinery of a day continuing to run. I had a property assessment to review before 5 o'clock. I had dinner with my mother on Saturday. I had a meeting next week with a financial advisor, a woman named Sandra, who had been recommended by Diane's colleague and who specialized in working with women navigating post-divorce asset reconstruction, a phrase that had sounded clinical when I first heard it, and now sounded simply accurate. I had, in other words, the ordinary forward motion of a life that was not finished being lived. I started the car. On the way back to the office, I drove past the Cascade Heights neighborhood without meaning to, not a detour, exactly just the natural routing of a city I had lived in for 11 years. The house was visible briefly from the cross-street white and settled in the afternoon light, the front yard still precise, the backyard fence still there. Beyond the kitchen window where I had stood and looked out so many times. The camellias along the backyard fence were still blooming. Not for much longer. A year later, I have an office with a window. Not a corner office, not yet, though Sandra tells me the trajectory is there if I want it. Just a window, south-facing, that looks out over a stretch of midtown Atlanta that includes, on clear days, the distant suggestion of the downtown skyline. I have a small succulent on the sill that I remember to water approximately 60% of the time, and that is thriving anyway, which I find privately encouraging. The Cascade Heights house is mine, solely cleanly recorded in Fulton County with my name and no other. The title is the clearest document I own. I had it framed, not the whole thing, just the page with my name and the legal description and the recorder's stamp. And I put it in the bottom drawer of my desk at home. Not to look at regularly, but to know it is there. The way you keep certain things, not for display, but for ballast. The camellias are gone. Diane and I dug them up on a Saturday in late May, the weekend after the title transfer, with 2 shovels borrowed from my neighbor Gerald, who is 71 and keeps an immaculate tool shed, and asked no questions. We worked for 2 hours in the Atlanta heat, Diane in old law school sweatpants, and me in gardening gloves I had bought specifically for this occasion, and we got all 11 of them out by noon. Diane wanted to compost them. I let her. It was enough that they were gone. In their place, I planted gardenias. My grandmother Hattie's flower, the ones she kept in a pot on her porch in Vine City, that made the whole front of the house smell like something worth coming home to. I planted 7 of them along the fence line, and they are slow to establish, but they are establishing. And by next summer, Diane tells me they will bloom. And I believe her because she researched it, because that is what Diane does. And because I have learned in this past year to accept help from people who offer it in good faith. That has been the most unexpected thing. Not the legal resolution. Diane had mapped that out with enough precision that the outcome, while not guaranteed, was at least legible. Not the financial reconstruction. Sandra has been methodical and clear, and the picture she has drawn for me is not comfortable yet, but it is coherent, which is enough for now. The unexpected thing has been learning at 35 to let people help me. I had not known how thoroughly I had learned to manage alone until I had to stop. My mother came to the house in June, the first time she'd been there since I'd gotten the locks changed. She walked through every room without comment, which is her way. She processes silently and speaks precisely the opposite of me, who speaks first and processes after. At the end, she stood in the kitchen and looked out at the backyard, at the bare fence line where the camellias had been, at the turned earth, where the gardenias were just beginning to take hold, and she said, "Your grandmother would have liked this." I said, "I know." She stayed for dinner. We talked about things that were not Derek, not Virginia, not the bank, not any of it. Just the ordinary conversation of a mother and daughter who have lived in the same city for 11 years and somehow managed to see each other less than they intended. We talked about her garden, her book club, a documentary she'd watched 3 times because she couldn't decide how she felt about it. We talked about my work, about Sandra, about the property assessment I'd done the week before that had turned out to be more interesting than I expected. She left at 9. At the door, she held my face in both hands for a moment, just a moment the way she used to when I was small, and said nothing. Then she left. I stood on the porch after her taillights disappeared and breathed the warm June air and thought, this is what I was protecting. Not the house, exactly. This, the ordinary texture of an ordinary evening with someone who knows you and asks nothing from you except to keep showing up. Derek, I do not see. His plea agreement required cooperation, which he provided, and the civil restitution process has proceeded through attorneys on both sides without requiring us to be in the same room. Gerald Okafor is efficient. Diane is thorough. The money moves in the correct direction. I have not spoken to Derek since the bank in March, and I have no particular desire to change that. Virginia I have seen once. In July, at a mutual acquaintance's retirement party across a hotel ballroom in Buckhead. She saw me at the same moment I saw her. We held each other's gaze for perhaps 3 seconds. Then she looked away first, and I turned back to my conversation, and we spent the rest of the evening on opposite sides of the room without incident. She was not wearing the navy suit. I noticed. I noted it. I moved on. Renee, I have had coffee with twice. She is 26 sharp, working toward a finance degree at night, while managing the client services desk during the day. She wants to work in wealth management, eventually specifically, she said, with clients who are navigating financial transitions. Women primarily. People who arrive at her desk not always understanding what they don't know yet. You have a talent for that, I told her, which is an understatement. She laughed and said she'd had good practice. I think about the version of me who almost signed those documents, who had the pen in her hand, the portfolio open in front of her, Virginia's voice providing patient context for papers she was not supposed to read too carefully. I think about how close that version of me came to ratifying 14 months of careful, methodical theft with a single signature. I think about what would have happened. The assets buried, the transfer complete, the house gone. 3 entities deep into a structure I had no practical access to, and me with no legal ground to stand on, because I had confirmed in my own hand that I knew and consented. I think about the 4 words that stopped it. I keep the note in the bottom drawer of my desk at home, next to the framed page from the title transfer. I do not look at it often, but I know it is there in Renee's handwriting, ink slightly smeared on the left edge. 4 words from a woman who saw clearly and acted quickly and asked nothing in return except that I run. I faked a headache. Close enough. The succulent on my office windowsill needs water. The gardenias in the backyard are taking hold. Sandra's latest projection has a 5-year horizon that looks, if not easy, then possible. And possible, I have learned, is enough to work with. Yesterday I drove past First Meridian Bank on Peachtree Road. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I noticed it the way you notice a building you have a history with, briefly, accurately, without drama. And then I kept driving. Atlanta moved past the windows. The city that does not know and does not care what happens inside any particular morning, in any particular life, going about its ordinary business in the ordinary light. I went about mine. There is something I want to say to you directly before we close. If you have been sitting with this story and felt something tighten in your chest at the part about the pen, if you recognize something in Lucy's 6 years of small concessions of noticing and then talking yourself out of what you noticed, of being told you were catastrophizing, then I want you to hear this. You are not wrong about the small things. The feeling that runs along your collarbone when a detail doesn't fit is not anxiety. It is information. The question is not whether to trust it. The question is what you do next, whether you fold the feeling away into a drawer labeled too sensitive, too suspicious, too much, or whether you let it become a question, and then an answer, and then an action. Lucy's story ends with a window and a succulent and gardenias where the camellias used to be. That ending did not come from rage. It did not come from a dramatic confrontation, well, one of those, but you understand. It came from a woman who stopped talking herself out of what she already knew, picked up a phone, and trusted the people who showed up when she called. You deserve people who show up when you call. You deserve to know what you're signing. You deserve a house with your name on it, whatever that house looks like for you. If this story found you at a moment when you needed to hear it, leave a comment. Tell me where you are in the world, what time it is, and 1 word for how you're feeling right now. I read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now before the next one starts. Because the next story's coming, and I promise you, you will not want to come in late.